seems fair to me.
Yes, it did.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Thanks for joining us for this edition of Donnybrook. Great to have you with us, and we've got a lot to talk about on this edition before the big holiday weekend. So let's meet our panelists and then get right into our discussion. Well, she's the news director for the Big 550 KTRS. Let's welcome Wendy Wiese, along with Mr. Bill McClellan from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. He's Ray Hartmann, host of In the Know, weeknights at 9 on KTRS and columnist for the Riverfront Times. And from the St. Louis American, hello, Alvin Reid, who also is heard on 97.1 and 590. Well, Wendy, this past week, the St. Louis City and St. Louis County shelter-in-place guidelines were relaxed, and basically businesses partially reopened, like dining in. Some people were not in favor of that, including Vervis Jones, former comptroller for the city, father of mayoral candidate Trishara Jones. He tweeted that Lyda Crewson is more concerned about business than African-American lives. And there was actually a parade-like protest where people said, hey, we think that the city and county should still be closed up. What do you think about this?
I think that Vervis Jones is a good father, and he is campaigning for his daughter, as any father would at this point. But I don't think that Lyda Crewson had any more of a choice as of, Sunday than Sam Page. It was like watching an avalanche. I mean, it felt that way, that even if they had said on Sunday or Saturday, we've had a second thought on this, it wouldn't matter. They would have blown the doors off anyway. People were ready. Dr. Alex Garza with the pandemic task force just updated a few moments ago that all of the numbers, the metrics are exactly where they hoped they would be. Things still look pretty good. I think it was beyond anyone's control. We would all probably, if we lived in a perfect world and money wasn't an issue and businesses collapsing, if that wasn't an issue, we'd love to be cautious, even more cautious, but there was no choice.
Anyone disagree?
I agree with Wendy, and I don't think it's fair to, I happen to think it is too early, but as Wendy says, it's certainly not fair to accuse a mayor or county executive or whatever who's trying to balance a tough decision and say they don't care about lives. I mean, it's a really, I think Wendy's basically right that politically it's almost impossible, but I do think it's too soon. I mean, anything they can do to slow the process, and for goodness sake, people need to wear masks, and that shouldn't be a political issue.
But boy, you look at St. Charles, they never closed down, and their cases and death counts are much lower per capita than the city or the county, much lower.
Well, not as close. And also, it may stay like that the rest of the summer. Give me a couple of weeks on that because we will see. Other places in the country that have opened up have like double. And that's not in Missouri, and that's not here, but that's going on across the country. So I'm not so ready to just, say like they were right, this place was wrong. If you look at Illinois, they're beginning to relax what they were doing. And Illinois had a far worse problem than Missouri did, one of the top states in the nation. At some point, you have to make the decision, we're going to slowly but surely open back up. And so Missouri's behind the curve. Either those that have just fully opened up or those that are really hit hard that are trying to do it are doing it in a way that I can accept. So I guess I have to accept what we're doing in St. Louis County and St. Louis City as well.
And I don't think it's not really quite fair to say St. Charles County didn't do anything. I mean, they basically, I agree with Alvin that Parsons' response was way too little. And by the way, he's like tied for the 4th least popular governor in the country now, along with DeSantis and some others, but in the recent polling, Washington Post. But I like in St. Charles County, they did have basic advice and they still actually have 6-foot distancing recommendations. It's
Yeah.
just the way they delivered it was.
Well, it was
different.
all voluntary on the part of businesses, but they
Yeah, but
did
it
have
was not.
contact tracing. They did have contact tracing,
Yeah,
which
I admittedly,
pointing
I
out, Wendy
I know
Wiese,
about last
they
night, but
don't have the
I
same
don't
level
think
of
it's fair.
contact tracing in the city and the county. And now
Right.
some, including LJ Punch, a professor of medicine at WashU, Wendy, is saying the county should be paying the city for contact tracing. What was the response of Sam Page, and what do you think of it?
He was his usual measured self, but he clapped that back so quickly in terms of the CARES Act and any funding being specifically allotted to each region. And he was essentially saying that, yeah, we're neighbors, but that doesn't mean that we're going to pay for anything that's happening in the city when it comes to mitigating.
Except that the county will end up paying if people get sick. I mean, I think it's very short-sighted to Sam Page and to be saying, well, the government won't let me do it. That's silly. That we need contact tracing, everybody says, to come back. And the city has no money and just a few. And the county, it'd be easier to say, I think, to say right now, we're going to merge our two health departments as far as contact tracing goes, because it's vitally important. And the idea that Sam is going to protect the county money, short-sighted, I say.
It's an election year.
I know.
But I also think it's a realization that the border is real. And no matter what we think about, or when, Better Together said, let's merge, and the whole world lost their mind. Okay, the city, sometimes it is okay to make a decision that this time the city has to be responsible for itself. And it may not be the most popular thing to do, but I don't think that that's unreasonable for the county executive to say this time, or maybe 5 times from now, that the answer is no. And, the wastebasket and the answer no are two things that the United States of America needs to use more. Tough decision.
This is an infectious disease, Alvin. And like I look at my street, half the street is in the 28th ward of the city and half is in the county. And the idea that we'll have contact tracing over here, but we won't have it over there. I mean, everybody's saying this is an infectious disease. It's a public health issue. I think it's very silly of Sam Page.
Well, should the St. Louis County have paid Franklin County? Should they help Jefferson County? I understand that the most cases are in the city, but we border those counties as well.
But there's very few cases in Franklin County.
Most of the cases are in St. Louis County. In fact, St. Louis County has 55% of all coronavirus deaths in the state of Missouri. It's really amazing.
Charlie,
we're a big place.
Can I say, I want to say, because as a county resident, we have cooperation on police things. And I think Bill's absolutely right. This is an infectious disease that does not respect the borders. And on the subject of controlling the pandemic, I think everybody, and it goes for St. Charles, I think everybody ought to work together. And if the resources are there where we can work together on contact tracing, I'm absolutely in favor of doing that.
Ray,
and I don't know that it's bad politics.
Ray, while I have you, let me ask you about a former guest of yours. Her name is Kelly Dunaway, member of the St. Louis County Council. And it's true, I was lying in bed listening to the two of you talk 2 or so weeks ago. Love your program. Well, here's the deal. This week, she complained about some of the Sam Page expenditures, these emergency monies that are supposed to be combating coronavirus. In particular, she questioned the use of emergency money to fix an escalator. And she's part of this committee that is kind of reviewing the expenditures, but they're just reviewing because she and other Democratic members of the St. Louis County Council gave up their oversight role 3 weeks ago. Didn't you find that to be the biggest irony that you've seen in St. Louis politics, where you got county council members who abdicated their responsibility, and now they're really concerned that they have no say over the expenditures?
No, I don't think it's irony. I mean, I think that they were wrong. I said it at the time. I was with the Republicans and as well as Jake Zimmerman and Mark Mantovani, and thinking it was a ridiculous decision that was really, I think, at the feet of Sam Page, but the council did it. And yeah, I'm sure they've got buyer's remorse. I'd like to see them figure out a way to take that authority back. I don't know the law, but I don't see why they couldn't change their mind Tuesday and say, look, we trusted that you would be able to do this with us having just a committee, and it's not working. I think they should take it back if they can.
Oh, Ray, they gotta live with what they did, and scream in the parking lots of the grocery stores or whatever they tweet. And really, you can't lay it at the foot of Sam Page. This is what the county council did, and the county council voted 4-3, and now they regret it. You just have to live with it.
I agree, and also, you're saying the county council did it, but let's be specific. The Democratic members of the county council did this. Now they have to live with it, and now they see what's going on. And as the wind blows, they have thrown Sam Page under the proverbial bus because, dude, you are not winning the nomination for the Democratic Party in the county executive race. This is down to Jake Zimmerman and Mark Mantovani. So they have jumped this sinking ship, and they let it be known next week. So Sam Page is not going to get any favor whatsoever from the Democratic wing of the county council because they're done with him. And it's his fault because to show up at that meeting with no plan, anything,
wait a minute, Alvin.
That's pitiful.
Alvin, did they not have any control over their own votes? I mean, do you see what I'm saying? I mean,
yes, they did. It's their fault. I mean, I'm not excusing them at all. What I'm saying is you voted for this. Now you got to live with this. But instead of saying we made a mistake, now they're just going to pile on Sam Page.
I think you're being ridiculous. Look, Charlie, I think this is ridiculous. First of all, Lisa, as far as I know, Lisa Clancy and Kelly Dunaway continue to support Sam Page for sure.
Yes.
I can't speak for the others, but I don't understand this idea that, well, you made a mistake and we all agree that they made a mistake. And I'm saying, let's see if they can undo their mistake. And you go, no, make them live with their mistake. What would be harmful if they decided, look, we made a mistake, you admit it, and we do want more oversight and change their mind. I don't see why
I'll tell you,
about
Ray,
the fact that they made a mistake.
The excuse for making the mistake was it's an emergency. And it is an emergency. And the idea that, well, now we're going to tie up all this help in legislation and a legislative fight. I think that they just have to realize they did the wrong thing. And
I think
to have somebody with Deborah Patterson's background saying we don't have a budget. We're not, essentially we know nothing. We're in the dark. We're getting no direction. I mean, that is a colossal embarrassment, and not just for Sam Page.
Deborah Patterson used to head up the Monsanto Fund. Hey, Ray, while we were talking to you, I wanted to ask you about an angle that you brought up last week, and I think you've done some fair reporting on this one, and that is that there was a settlement between the county over, I guess, a sexual harassment claim by an employee by the name of Annette Reid against St. Louis County Council member Ernie Trachis. And the county settled it for $60,000 after a law firm, Thompson Coburn, one of the top law firms in the city, if not the Midwest, kind of brokered this deal. There was a non-disclosure agreement, ostensibly, for both parties. But Thompson Coburn, which got money to broker this deal, also made a contribution to Sam Page's campaign for re-election. This just 1 year after we found out that Steve Stenger was awarding contracts to people who gave him campaign donations. So I thought it was a little bit soon for that. But Tony Messenger in his column says that Thompson Coburn should, Dr. Sam Page should return the money to Thompson Coburn. And obviously you agree with that. Is that correct?
Yeah, he mentioned me, which was nice. It's nice to be mentioned. Pulitzer Prize winner mentions you. That's cool. But and I give shout out to Christine Byers, who was on our show a couple of weeks ago. She had an amazing story on KSTK, where she got Annette Reid to, I don't know how she did it with the NDA, but to talk. And I think in terms of impact, that's going to have the biggest impact because Annette Reid, it's one of those, do you believe the woman stories? But she basically accused Sam Page of trying to talk her out of filing this thing. As far as the thing I found ironic is, Sam, I think the actual biggest story personally is the lack of transparency. The council members found out about the $60,000 settlement in the newspaper. And this is a guy that ran Sam Page, or not ran, but he proclaimed that pay to play is dead in St. Louis County, which it clearly isn't, and B, that we're going to have this new era of transparency. And to make a $60,000 payment, not even tell the council, is just insane. And as far as Thompson Coburn, they give a lot to a lot of people.
Is not a lot of money in a settlement like this. This is not a lot of money. I mean, don't forget.
I don't care if it's $600. You still
$22 million.
You still have transparency. And as far as Thompson Coburn, they gave 30 grand to Stenger. The interesting thing about it, and I think Tony's right saying, is if you're going to make this your brand, I'm not accusing Thompson Coburn of anything. They give a ton of money to politicians. But if you're going to make this your brand,
no,
Steve, I disagree. Sam Page, you don't give it was about a $21,000 deal. You do not accept Bill? A $15,000 gift to your PAC. Somebody doing business with the
this is like lobbying. I mean, this is what Thompson Coburn and a lot of big firms do, is they give all this money away. And I haven't read Tony's column yet. That'll come out tomorrow, I take it, right?
Mm-hmm. It's online.
And I seldom disagree with Tony, but it's perfectly legal what Thompson Coburn did, giving money to the county and then the county hiring them for a case. And I'm not sure that Sam Page should have to give this back. If we start going through all of these donations, there's a lot of people who are going to give a lot of money back.
Bill, there's no suggestion of illegality here. The question is, Sam Page literally has made his brand. Pay to play is dead in St. Louis County. And the optics of this, not the legality, the optics of this is just all, as Rita Day said on my show, it doesn't pass the smell test.
Well, it's the system. And I would venture to say, if you looked into all the big law firms, you're going to find out that they're all giving a lot of money to the government.
Well, and I think there's a problem with that. I think that there should be a rule, a law that says that if you are doing business with the county and they're paying you as a contractor, you should not be contributing to members of the county council or to the county executive's campaign.
Oh, I think that'd be a great idea, Charlie. Make it a law. But as long as it's not a law, I'm not so sure about this.
Because right now it's a chicken or the egg proposition. Are you going to be working for or with the county if you don't make a contribution?
And as I say, I think the unique thing here is Sam having run on ending pay to play, which all we ever said, it certainly is not exculpatory to his predecessor, who's where he belongs, but he made such a haughty thing out of that. And then the real thing is the transparency. How do you not tell your own council, much less the public, when you settle a sex harassment suit with involving a county councilman?
Can I throw in real quick? What do county council people do? Do they go do their regular jobs? Do they show up on Monday night and go to the meeting? I mean, seriously, all this stuff goes down and whatnot, and everybody comes in and said, like, I had no idea, and this and that and the other thing. Do they ask any questions of anybody, or do they just show up on Monday night and go to the meeting? Because it sounds to me like we got a lot of showing up on Monday night and going to the meeting.
Hey, Alvin, while I got you there, I want to ask you about the zoo, which announced that it's going to open up partially in June, but by reservation. You'll have to go online or make a phone call and get a time when you can go through. Now, obviously, they're going to practice coronavirus guidelines, meaning only 10 or 25% of capacity will be allowed so that people are not rubbing shoulders. So it's going to get sold out. Let's face it. Moms and dads will take their kids to the zoo, and there'll be it'll get jammed. There won't be enough spaces for everyone who wants to go. Do you think that those who live in the city and county and whose taxes support the zoo should be on some sort of priority list?
Don't you hate all arguments that say, like, well, okay, but people who don't live in the city or the county, I don't think they should ever be charged to go to the zoo. We've talked about that before. However, we're in a unique situation where I think, all right, your major donors are going to get any reservation they want, okay? Because your major donors could probably tour the zoo at 11 o'clock at night if they wanted to. Then people who are friends of zoo, people who are in the zoo membership, hey, they've earned their right. But who comes next? And I think it should be county and city residents, because it is a tax dollar that we give to the zoo. So I don't think you should just throw it wide open to everybody, because, by the way, on the first day, everybody who decides they want to make a reservation does so. But then the lady or gentleman that gave $100,000, to the zoo, they'll bump you because they have to get them in. I think it would be fair this time to say, like, hey, taxpayers first. And I'm not for that forever, but right now, yes.
If you're going to base it on who gave the most money, it is the taxpayers. I mean, the taxpayers give 22 million or something to the zoo. I think Alvin's right.
Alvin wants the donors to go first.
Well, I thought you said the city county taxpayers. Okay.
Well, I didn't know what I was saying. Like, all right, I'll just use it. I guess it was Taylor's and others that paid for the new, sea lion and seal thing. Okay. Sure. Now, anybody in their family who makes a reservation should get to go, because I gave you all $8-10 million. Okay, so I'm not ridiculous. I say you Wendy, take care of the people that take.
Wendy,
I just can't see the Taylors sitting down to stlzoo.org. I don't see that scenario. If you've given that kind of money to the zoo, I don't think you have to go through the website the way the rest of us do. I think you're raising a really valid point, but I think a lot of people are going to find it distasteful, because you're talking about, at least for the time being, children, families who are not going to be able to get into the zoo for the foreseeable future.
I agree.
It should absolutely be the public first. And by the way, this does make, and I think it's unfortunate we're talking about them and not the Science Center, the Art Museum, and the History Museum, and for that matter, the garden, that have also been hit by this. And the fact is, of all the things that could come out of this, if we could abandon the 20th century tourism model of making it free.
That's not an argument right now, Ray. That is not an argument.
It is an argument.
Taking a situation and using it out of context.
Absolutely,
that's not
an argument.
The argument. If they had to pay, we wouldn't be having this argument. They would just have to pay. This is about who gets to utilize the zoo right now. And that's the biggest fear that I have with this, is that people are going to extrapolate this into that people should have to pay to go to the zoo, and that should never happen. This is a unique situation at a unique time, and like others in this country, I think you're using this to make your argument, and it's not fair. It's not fair. It's just not fair.
Drop the 20th century tourism model.
That's not fair. That's a different argument altogether.
We need to drop
I think
Alvin, for all of them.
Alvin is correct. A lot of us are using the pandemic to justify our existing or previous positions. There's no doubt about that.
Happy to do it here.
But how about you, Bill McClellan, when it comes to area churches? Do you think that churches, which have been told that they cannot hold services like they did the past, should they be eligible for federal coronavirus bailout money?
Well, I'm uncomfortable with it. I'd rather see the churches get it than the St. Louis Cardinals get it. But while churches are clearly a force for good in the community, there's something about the government starting to fund churches that just bothers me. How uniform is it going to be? Which churches get it? I'm uncomfortable with it.
And I agree with you, Bill. I think the framers were very clear, but I think this case that we've had in Illinois, where this humanitarian philanthropic businessman is paying the fines of these churches who were, penalized by Governor Pritzker because they opened, even though they were practicing social distancing and doing the hand sanitizing and that kind of thing. But this man made a really great point, Dr. Wilson. He said, it's sad to me that the marijuana dispensaries and the liquor stores and the home improvement stores are considered essential, but the churches are not considered essential. I just thought that.
I hear you, Wendy, but at the same time, what we don't know is these same churches could have $750,000 in the bank. Now, if it's Harvard or it's Washington University, we're upset because they got millions of dollars in an endowment, but we have no idea how much money churches have. Do they have to declare that? Do the Cardinals have to declare how much money they have in the bank before they get their PPP money? No, I think churches,
now, hang on a second. The Cardinals didn't get PPP money. They got
like a tax credit or something. But nonetheless, we have no idea. And, like churches rely on people giving money on Sundays into the collection plate. Right. And it's cash money. But it's money we have no idea how much they have. Now, if you want to pay like worker salaries, that's one thing. But you know who else is covered in this? The pastor's salary. So that means that, what's his name? Joel Osteen, he can get... His salary can be paid by the federal government. That's outrageous.
Charlie, I have to say, I'm uncomfortable with the idea of having fine churches too. I really am a separation, First Amendment separation of church and state. And I don't think you have to be in both directions. I don't think the government had business fining churches. I think it's one thing for the government to come in and enforce its ordinances or something. But the idea of fining them or giving them money is problematical to me. I think you've got to respect separation of church and state more than that.
Well, here's what happens.
The Cardinals, they did get CARES money. They just did it cleverly. And my point was they had to jump through hoops to reduce their hours to qualify for it. That's what I
business. If a business, a church is a business, a baseball team's a business.
A church is not a business.
A church is not a business, Charlie.
Oh, yeah.
No.
No, a church is not a business.
No, a church is not a business.
What happens at church, at least the churches I go to, they collect money at those services which have been effectively shut down. And that's money that's needed to pay the bills for the lights, as well as the pastor, as well as other fees that they have, of course.
If we started treating churches like businesses, that would change the entire dynamic of faith in the United States of America.
Thank you.
Hey, folks, we are out of time. Hey, stand by, because speaking of money, Steve Fazzari from WashU, he's an economist, joins us next, so don't touch that dial.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network. Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Thanks for joining us for Donnybrook Part 2. This is the segment where we put a leading thinker on the hot seat. And today that's Steve Fazzari, who's a professor of economics at Washington University and also the incoming director of the Wiedenbaum Center there. Dr. Fazzari, thank you very much for joining us on Donnybrook. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, Charlie. Thanks for having me.
And this probably is the worst economy you've seen, certainly in your professional career and certainly your life. Am I right?
Mostly, yes. There's always ambiguity in economics, but in terms of the drop, the collapse of the economy, starting in late March through April, now into May, absolutely the worst I've ever seen in my life. In terms of the long-term effects, the Great Recession was pretty awful. We don't quite know how this is all going to play out. I had hoped that would be the worst of my life, but I'm afraid now that may not be the case.
Well, we've got questions for you. We're going to go around the horn, starting with Wendy Wiese. Wendy?
When it comes to maybe the greatest misunderstandings, because we're hearing from so many people about reading the tea leaves and that kind of thing. What is the greatest misunderstanding out there at this time to your mind, Professor, when it comes to the economy and the fact that, it's some politicians, it's going to be greater than ever before. can you just inject a little reality into what we're constantly bombarded with?
That's a very interesting question. In particular, I like the angle about the politicians. Somehow, we've gotten ourselves into a situation where presidents and congressional leaders take credit for good economies, and presidents and congressional leaders lose elections because they've somehow bungled things when they're bad economies. Now, policy matters. I'm sure we'll talk a lot about policy today, but most of what goes on in the economy is dependent of what a president does or what Congress is doing, or even what the tax system is about, things like that. So the idea that somehow there are these magic switches that policymakers can pull to control the economy one way or the other is very misleading. And also, I want to suggest in my own business that the idea that economists somehow know the secret sauce and we know things that the rest of the world doesn't is also quite misleading. We've got some expertise and we have ways of putting analysis together in useful ways, I think, but don't think that we have all the answers, particularly in an unusual time like this.
Let's go to Bill McClellan.
Well, Steve, what jobs do you think are going to disappear forever? We keep hearing that this is going to change a lot of things. And I worry in downtown St. Louis, in the building that I worked at, in the Post-Dispatch building, Jack Dorsey from Twitter bought the building and was going to be bringing in hundreds of high-paid young people who would just make Washington Avenue alive. And now Dorsey said everybody can work from home in his entire organization. Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, I think we're likely to see some what economists would call structural changes, Bill. I think that there will be some long-term effects. I don't know if it's a situation of jobs in some whole sector of the economy going away totally, but certainly reallocations, and maybe some pretty significant ones. One obvious thing is what we're doing here now with Zoom. A lot of us have experienced what video conferencing can do, and I know I've talked to a number of people who feel like business travel will never be the same again. Why should we get on airplanes and pay lots of money and stay in expensive hotels if we can do this just by connecting with modern technology? That's a good example. I think retail is changing fundamentally. There's been clearly a trend in retail for a long time of shrinking brick and mortar stores, greater online shopping, but this is going to be a big kick, and both because I think people's experience will be different and the kinds of shopping they're doing in this crisis, but also because the stresses on brick and mortar retail are magnified. And so what might have been a slower decline and one maybe easier to manage is happening with a bang right now.
Ray?
What do you think government ought to be doing in places like Missouri with taxation policy? I mean, there's been sort of an orthodoxy in Missouri, for example, for a long time that just, taxes are bad, revenue's bad. And do you see any possibility that this could change our attitude toward funding our governments?
Well, there might be some change in the way we think about the role of government. One of the real problems we've seen in this crisis is the inability of governments, in particular states, to be as effective as we would like them to be in providing unemployment insurance. When this all started, I was emphasizing two things that I thought were absolutely critical to leading to speedy recovery. One was very generous unemployment insurance. The second one was programs to help maintain the viability of business. And we can talk a lot about that, but I think we're recognizing we need our government, and the fact that we have truly antiquated information systems for the labor departments and things like that. And Missouri is not as bad as other states in this regard, but I think it's kind of in the middle along these lines. It's just become a real problem. So you could imagine a push from the citizens for better government when it comes to dealing with economic crisis, but certainly also in the public health realm too. So in that sense, I think there could be a push for government. If you take that into taxes, well, if it's a state like Missouri, which is basically has to have a balanced budget, unlike the federal government, then if you're going to increase government services, there will probably have to be some adjustment on the tax side as well.
Alvin.
Professor, okay, you were talking about how bad the economy is, and I keep hearing how horrible it is, I mean, I don't see it, and I don't think most Americans see it. When are we going to feel it? When are we going to see it? I realize that a lot of people are out of their jobs, and maybe they're not making their bill payments, things like that. But I'm just like there are people who are getting the stimulus that don't need it, and there are businesses that are getting, the PPP that don't need it. When are we going to say, like, wow, this is bad? Because right now, I don't think there's an American out there, and I'm not talking about individuals who lost their jobs or anything like that. When is America going to feel this, horrible recession, almost a depression that everybody keeps talking about?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm interested that you feel. I'm glad that you haven't suffered any personal loss here that makes you feel it. I'll tell you how it worked for me. Uh, I'm a professor. I work for a well-funded institution that's kept my paycheck running, and I can work from home. I'm working hard from home. So, yes, in terms of my personal life, I'm not feeling very much. In fact, I'm saving more than I probably have in years because my income still keeps coming in, and I'm not going out to restaurants, and I'm not traveling. And I actually filled up my tank of gas after returning from a trip in mid-March. It is now end of May. I still have more than 3/4 of a tank left in my car. So, for some of us, our balance sheets are improving as our spending is lower and our income's maintained. But I'll tell you, when I started to see the level of shutdown, and this was coming back from an international trip, I got back just in time in mid-March, and I started to see the level of shutdown of the economy. I was stunned. And I started to go through the individual sectors of the economy, things like hotels and restaurants, travel, entertainment, retail, some of the wholesale that supplies retail, and started to just add up what I considered fairly modest reductions in these things. And all of a sudden, I had more than 8% of the economy, and then realized I was still too low. So we're talking now maybe of having a drop in the economy from its peak to its trough of what could easily be greater than 10%, might even be 15%. We have an unemployment rate that probably in April if it correctly measured, probably would be about 20%. Officially, it was just under 15. We're going to see it jump up again in May. I'm certain. That means that 1 out of 5 Americans is without a job. That is actively looking for a job. Most of those people have lost their jobs. There are 4 out of 5 Americans, 80% of us, that still were employed at that point. So in that sense, maybe people aren't quite feeling it. It is the case that the unemployment insurance has helped buffer this. There was a substantial response in the Big CARES Act that added $600 a week from federal money to what I would consider relatively stingy state unemployment benefits. So that's helping for now, but that expires on July 31st. In particular, if we don't see that unemployment extended, and we're still looking, as I expect we will be, at about 20% unemployment in mid to late July, that's going to be really, really tough. And we'll see that ripple. Not only does that hard on the 1 out of 5 Americans without a job, but it's going to ripple through the economy. So we have been buffered from this to some extent. So I'm not so surprised that your personal experience is, different lifestyle. But
okay, I got to take a little question with that. I'm not talking about my personal experience. What I'm saying is that when I listen, the country is completely broke. Okay. When will the country realize that the country is completely broke?
Well, I'm sorry. This is Donnybrook. I think people really are feeling it here. I think you talk to the food banks and they'll tell you how much their business has increased. And a lot of businesses have, particularly restaurants, have announced their dreams are over. They're closing their business.
Radio stations.
Well, no, for real.
Wait, you're making it sound like I don't understand this, okay?
No, I didn't say that.
Wrong,
I'm just saying.
right? And I'm sorry, Professor, but I want to get this straight right now, okay? I'm not saying that any individual is not hurting. What I'm saying is that for the overall, all right, when is the country as a whole going to realize what is going on, all right? And I don't think the country right now doesn't realize that.
Fine, I think it is now. But I was saying, the question I have for our guest here is when you consider that a substantial portion, I mean, there's estimates of 30-40% or more restaurants are not coming back. I mean, do you think that the restaurant industry will shrink, or will it be the sort of thing that over time, and the supply and demand will either redistribute those dollars or heal somehow, which will a smaller number of restaurants do well.
Right. Professor, what do you think?
Short term and long term on that one. In the short term, I think you will see reduction in number of restaurants and other businesses heavily affected by this. Unfortunately, my hope that we maintain business viability through this crisis is looking like it's only been partially successful, and the result's going to be that businesses we're going to lose some businesses. Restaurants maybe being at the top of the list. They operate on low margins. They basically, some of them had to shut down completely. Others are just struggling along, maybe with a bit of takeout. I think we'll see a reduction in restaurants in the short term. I also think we're going to see a reduction in restaurant demand for some time to come, until people both feel more confident going out, and also the experience of the restaurant is one that they are looking forward to, which is not necessarily having servers and masks and plexiglass panels in between tables, et cetera, and so forth. So it's not that I think we both see a lower supply of restaurants, but also lower demand. I would be pretty optimistic a couple, 3 years down the road, in the sense that capitalism is I think, a very dynamic situation. You may have heard that Schumpeterian phrase. Joseph Schumpeter, a famous economist, called it creative destruction. And where sometimes you have these crises and some of the weaker businesses go away, but they are replaced over time. And if people want to go out to eat, as I'm sure they will once things settle down, you'll see new restaurants pop up again. So over a matter of a few years, I don't think the restaurant industry is going away or shrinking dramatically, but over the next 6 to 12 months, maybe yes.
Okay, but in terms of policy, let's say we've got businesses that have suffered, like little shops, hospitals, casinos, newspapers, radio, cruise lines, airlines, hotels. Do you recommend any policy that could help these industries at this time?
Yes. At first, I thought what they needed was easy access to credit, what accountants and economists call working capital, to keep them going, be able to pay their rent, maintain their business, maintain their facilities, utilities, things like that. Possibly keeping some people working if there was something for those folks to do. And then if we had a shutdown that lasted a few weeks, maybe even up to a couple of months, and then they restart, that'd be enough to tie them over. Now that it looks like things are lasting longer, I'm more concerned. I think that the Paycheck Protection Program in the big CARES Act that was passed by Congress a while back did provide an interesting support for small business and a lot of loans. I think it's over $600 billion now have gone out. But I think as we've already commented on, those loans aren't necessarily going to the businesses that need it the most. In addition, it's very closely tied to payroll. Businesses are in kind of a strange position. They can get that loan forgiven or a large part of it forgiven if they use it for payroll. But if they don't have anything for their workers to do, they're caught kind of between a rock and a hard place. And they were putting this thing together fast. They needed to. I get it. But the structure needs to be rethought. One thing I've heard from other economists, and I find myself somewhat sympathetic to, is a medium to longer term policy more carefully worked out, where some of these loans can change into grants. And the key there is finding ways to identify those businesses that really needed to remain viable versus those that would be happy to get an extra $100,000 of government money.
Wendy?
Professor, if we have, as there is, there's this constant speculation about the second wave in the fall, if it takes that long to get here, what would the long-term or even the short-term impact, the effect of something like that be?
That's another good question, and frankly, one of my biggest concerns in this situation. I will say that with the kind of incredible quick drop in the economy imposed by something from the outside, imposed by a virus, not by too much housing debt or a technology bubble, but something outside the economy, there was the potential for it to come back reasonably quickly. And I would still hope that while we won't see a recovery nearly as fast as the drop, that's almost impossible, that we could still see substantial job growth starting in midsummer and really picking up in the fall. The biggest risk to that somewhat optimistic scenario is a second wave of virus infections. And I think the impact on consumer psychology is the big concern there. That people might get to the point now they're kind of tired of shutting down. Not that many people are sick, especially in our region. Even those that get sick, for most of them, they recover. They might say, well, maybe in the end of the day, this is not that big of a deal. But if they saw it come back again, the kind of epidemiological scenario that the public health people talk about, then I think that's going to be a real body blow to the economy.
Bill?
Professor, if you're talking to underclassmen and they say, what careers should I look at now? I mean, if I could look around the corner, Professor, what would I be seeing? What would you tell young people to think about doing?
Well, I'm a professor. I'm not a career counselor. So my first,
you're an economist.
My first
That's
response,
sort of like a career counselor.
my first response is study what you have a passion for, because that's what will really, that's what will make the education worthwhile for you. And you can develop the skills that you need for the job, depending on the job you go into as that time comes on. That's maybe a bit idealistic. I recognize that there are needs to have that undergraduate degree help you to, in a path to a job. My discipline, my home discipline initially of economics has been helpful in that regard, because it's, in my view, fundamentally interesting. It builds good analytical skills and ties in a broad sense into business. So that's a good one. But more and more businesses are looking for people with good people skills. I'm closely associated with the Department of Sociology now, and businesses are looking at how individuals interact with technology, for example, and being interested in how sociology ties into these things, or psychology in these areas. Obviously, engineering and the more technical fields, it pays well, and I think jobs are more plentiful there. But I'm giving kind of the true professor's answer, not wanting to leave the humanities out, because the humanities, writing and just understanding what it means to be human is such a valuable skill. So I encourage the undergrads to diversify as much as possible. Sure, they should keep one eye out on the job market, and maybe take a course in accounting. That's probably good for them. But study what their passion is, and build a broad set of skills.
Yes, sir. This is not a political question; it's economic. But if we have the spike again this fall that they are at least somewhat suggesting, a second wave, whatever, does the government? A lot of us really just don't understand the government's ability to borrow that seems endless. Do you see our federal government being able, from an economic perspective, to keep this from being, the kind of bread lines everywhere that the country saw in 1929?
The simple answer is yes, that the federal government, not the state governments, but the federal government really does have a very, very large fiscal capacity. I would hesitate to go use the word unlimited, in the sense that I think in the end there are some limitations, but I think we're way, way below those kinds of limitations. The biggest concern, from my point of view, of the federal borrowing would be the year-by-year interest expense. And with a generally weak economy, frankly, a fairly weak economy in my view before the recession, despite the low unemployment rate, and now after this, we see interest rates effectively zero in government debt. And I think as a result, we won't see much difficulty there for the federal government to take these roles. And so it's so important that, especially on the unemployment, that we see the federal government continue to provide the support that people out of jobs need. Otherwise, I think we're looking at a much worse situation.
Professor, when an American gets their stimulus check, should they invest it? Should they put it in the bank? Should they spend it? What's best for America?
Good question.
What's best for America? When the time comes that the economy is starting to open up, and especially if it looks like it's opening up safely, being able to go to some restaurants and start to help those businesses get back on their feet again. For those of us that can do that with our stimulus money, or this extra money we've saved by having lower spending during the crisis, this would be helpful. In the last few weeks, maybe even now, Missouri is just starting this. There's not much to spend on, so to speak, but that will probably change, and that will ultimately be best for the country. Now, what's best for the individual could sometimes be different. And for someone who's got a lot of credit card debt, for example, the first thing I'd say is get rid of that well over double-digit interest rate debt. So you get this kind of two-sided answer that for individuals, paying down debt might help them in their financial situation, whereas what the economy really needs is for folks to go out and start patronizing business again.
Professor, are you concerned at all? In the recent decades, we've seen the stock market take off and real estate prices, and those who had money in those areas have done really well, along with some very successful business owners. But the guy at the in the lowest quintile, maybe not doing all that well. Does it really matter if one guy like Jeff Bezos is worth $100 billion? Meanwhile, people in certain zip codes here are still making $10 an hour.
Yes, I think it does. I think part of this is a matter of social justice. We're a rich country, that people shouldn't have to, live in poverty in the United States, do without health care, do without just basic necessities of life. So that would be my first. It's not really an economic response; it's a human response, in some sense, to this situation. In addition, I think it does hurt the economy. I think it leads to one of the reasons I think the economy has been somewhat sluggish since going back to before the Great Recession, 2006, 2007, is because so much of the economic growth is going to the top part of the income distribution. One way to think about the economy is this recycling process. People bring their money in, they put their money out in spending, and to keep incomes flowing, that recycling has to continue. If everybody just stuffs money in their mattress, the economy would grind to a halt immediately. So as more of the growth in the economy is going to the top of the income distribution that doesn't spend as much of it, it's been harder and harder to keep economic growth going at a robust level. So in that sense, I think there are these macroeconomic implications of rising inequality. And this is an important challenge. And this crisis, unfortunately, is magnifying that. You're seeing the job losses concentrated more among lower income people. It's the higher income folks who can use Zoom and work from home. And yes, there's been job losses there too, but much less. And so the inequality problem that's been dogging us for decades is being magnified by what we're going through the past few months.
Wendy?
I think the part of it, and especially as a working mom, what is just mind-boggling for me is where we are today in terms of work from home and the long-term impact that is going to have. Companies are probably they're, at least from what you read anecdotally, they're ecstatic because they're not looking at lease agreements and complex on top of complex. Is that something that has surprised you, that was such an immediate component of this, that it was like, okay, everybody stay home, and wow, the air is cleaner and the sunsets are more beautiful, and as you said, we're not seeing the contrails in the sky. Were you surprised by how fast we saw the results of that decision?
Yes, I think so. I don't think I certainly didn't anticipate this, that so many of us would find ways to work at home. I must say, I miss going to the office. I miss the interaction with my colleagues. I was on sabbatical last year, so I wasn't teaching in the academic year that just ended, but looking forward to being with my students in the classroom in the fall, and I'm afraid that might not happen. We'll see how that goes. I am actually going to be eligible for Medicare about the time I'm reading my last paper in the fall semester, so it kind of tells you where I am on the cusp of what I need to worry about with undergraduates hanging out in dorms, somehow coming together and then coming into class. So there are clearly some downsides, but in the end, I think people are finding ways to adjust. Humans are adaptable. And that I think we will see. I think earlier one of the questions was, what kind of structural change will we see? And I wouldn't be surprised to see this being a real shift towards more working at home. You mentioned working moms or working dads. That they have some advantages if they can do this. Obviously, if the kids are running around driving you crazy, that is a challenge. But if you have the flexibility, to at least be home in some situation, maybe there are older children involved, it might make it a little easier. That's going to be very helpful and actually quite welcome. I mean, one of the colleagues in my new sociology department who are looking carefully at work-family stress, especially for women. And it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem in this country compared to European countries, which I think handle this better. And so maybe that'll be a good outcome of the crisis we're going through.
Professor Fazzari, I'm afraid the unforgiving clock says we're out of time, but thank you very much for sharing your insights with us on this edition of Donnybrook. So good to have you, and good luck as the incoming director of the Wiedenbaum Center at Washington University, where, of course, you teach economics. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Charlie, and everyone. Great discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a
Appreciate
great
it.
week and have a wonderful Memorial Day. We'll see you next week.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.